working. Okay, so let's start with the first one then. Is there somebody who is writing notes on our behalf?
I will be writing notes on your behalf.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Right, so we have the first question, which is how Africans and people of African descent found themselves where they are, if this is not answered yet. Right, okay. No. How Africans and people of African descent found themselves where they are, if this is not answered yet. Okay. I'm sure we have something to contribute, all of us, because it's actually describing our own experiences. How did we find ourselves to be where we are? And we know that, okay, there was slavery, and then we know that there was colonialism, and then we are now in post-colonial period, but our lives are not getting any better if you compare us with other continents, like Asia, that also experienced the same, and even Latin America. We still seem to be struggling to decolonize ourselves and define what we want to be and how we want to position ourselves globally. So what is it that is holding us? Let's have Dr. Keleng Mototsi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. I think if I take it from a South African perspective, I would say we have constitution, we have laws that outlaws racism, but it's a mixed bag. I think the whole problem of implementation, evaluation of our laws is also contributing to us to be as if we're stagnant. In your presentation, you indicated that what is holding us, we kind of moving one step forward and 20 steps backwards. So I think a lot that needs to be done is we have laws, and these laws are not being followed and implemented. Hence, we have a constitution that will say everybody is supposed to participate in their development. The councillors, I'm a councillor myself, I'm sitting here, I'm a mayor in a council here in the Northwest. We're supposed to engage our people. So there's a number of things that make us not to participate. I think we have a fractured what we are traumatized to some extent. We don't appreciate what we have. We have churches. The churches also are fractured. There's fighting in churches. There's fighting in the communities. I think it's a lineage of trauma for all of us, because if I may be honest, I can say there's a lot that we have achieved, but a lot needs to be implemented. I don't know. That will be my input. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We hear you. We are making progress, but we tend to go backwards as well. So I like the word that you chose, that we are traumatized people. Okay, so maybe this is something that we need to pay attention to. How do we then get healing from this trauma that the African continent is suffering from? Because it's not just South Africa. This is a continental problem, and it's there for Africans in the diaspora as well. Okay, Mojanko Gombi. Mojanku. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, good afternoon.
Afternoon, advocate.
I think in looking at, whenever I look at the challenge that is facing us, I find that in our education system, we don't really present ourselves and the diaspora within the right context. As we know, Africa has gone through different eras and epochs. So the slavery and dispossession period was just about 400, perhaps years, just over 400, 500 years of a very long history. If you go to the pre-slavery days, we had very great kingdoms and organized societies and philosophers and doctors and all of that. And so I will put on my video just now. We tend to focus a lot on the slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism period, which then it's on how we see the continent and how we see ourselves, and we are not able to say this was just a bad period, but we can get over it, because the mind plays an important part in knowing that there is a future for Africa. So even now we are going through a very difficult part when I talk about on the mainland, on the African mainland. We are going through a number of challenges of poverty, of instability, coups, and all of that. But it doesn't define who we are historically, and therefore, if we teach that to ourselves, to our children, we may just start the process of this renaissance of Africa. We may be able to say, we were great before. We've gone through a dip for 500 years. We will come up again. So for me, it's such an important lesson to teach. When you look at what as a woman, I always talk about Queen Taito in Ethiopia, who led the war there and defeated the Italians, so that Ethiopia was never colonized in the way that we were. Queen Zinga in Angola, Asantewa in Ghana, all those strong women who we don't talk about a lot as people. And there's hope for us. So I'm an eternal optimist, so I always see hope everywhere. So that will be my criticism of ourselves, that we just focus on a very short period in our history as African, instead of focusing on the broader period.
That's a very
Should
important.
I show my face?
Yeah.
Okay. You show my face.
Right. Thank you so much for that important point, to remind us that the way we structure our education, the content, of our education is very important. We need to be intentional in making sure that, we are indeed decolonizing the mind, by drawing on the positive past that we have. Masiwa.
Thank you, Prof, for this. I'm particularly encouraged by what we have heard, but at the same time, I think when we look at where we are as Africa, we can't really move away from the reality of a death in leadership on the continent. I think we have generally, after the colonial period, we have left politics to people that do not value the common good. And if you check across the African continent, it's so clear that our leaders, if you look at the African Union, if you look at the regional bodies across the African continent, they tend to serve only the interests of the rulers and not generally the common good that affects the majority of the Africans. So in a way, there is no incentive for ordinary Africans to do so well for their countries in most cases, because we don't reward competence. And we've seen a lot of African people that are looking to escape from the continent, mainly because of this problem that we are having with leadership. Our politics empowers the rulers while disempowering the people. And therefore, at the end of the day, if you look today, Africans, very competent African people, are actually behind the successes that we talk about all over the world. If you look at the creation of the COVID-19 vaccine, there are so many Africans that are involved, but Africa is struggling to get that vaccine because we have a political system that is chasing the people that should be driving the development of the continent out of the continent. And this, for me, is really a cause for concern. If you check at Singapore, those that have done a bit of some history, you might realize that in the 1960s, I think around 1965, Singapore and Ghana were exactly at the same category in terms of economic development. But a few decades later, Singapore is way ahead of most of all African countries, maybe all of us put together. And this, I think, what we need is to go back to the drawing board and start thinking about who is the leader in our communities, because we are not currently getting the right leaders into power. And therefore, I think what we need, whether it is in church, whether it is in politics, whether it is in business, I think we need to get the right leadership, because leadership matters. We might say a lot of things, but if our leadership is wrong, I don't think anything will be right. So yeah, I think we are where we are. And I'm not taking away the impact of colonization, the impact of all the other external forces. They are there, but our leadership in most cases has been opening the door. We have recently started opening our doors to Chinese colonization, basically. And we are suffering because of that. Ordinary people do suffer, but the elites are okay with the Chinese because they get something directly, privately. But what is this doing to the development of the continent? So I think we need to really look at our leadership.
Thank you so much. I've noticed that, Reverend Chikane is here. So I would like to hand over. We have, I think, exhausted, question 1, which is about how Africans and people of African descent found themselves, where we are. We have discussed, issues of that we, in the case of South Africa, we have good laws which are in place, but we tend to go one step forward and 2 steps backwards. And then we've also heard that, our education system is stuck with the colonial period. We are not looking back to the pre-colonial period to draw on what is positive, from that period. And now we have just heard, from Masiwa saying that, actually we have a problem with the leadership, okay, that the leadership does not see beyond, just gaining for themselves and, uplifting the people. That, when we compare ourselves with, Asia has blossomed, very fast. And by the way, it's not only Singapore. Most of the Asian countries, that were at the same level with Africa, that were also colonized by the same colonizers, have advanced, in a way that we are nowhere near, not even half of where they are at the moment. So I now hand over the moderation to Reverend Chikane. Is he here? I thought I saw him. He sent it. He was here a few minutes ago. Yes. Reverend Chikane?
It seems that he might have stepped out again.
Okay. Right.
I see, Isabel, that he has raised the second question in the chat box.
Okay. Right. So how Africans, okay, we've done that one. What have they done to undo the impact of the history of slavery, colonialization, dictatorship on our lives? Okay, is this the question that he posted, or there's another one?
So it is the question.
Yes.
And it just reads as so it's just written in the wrong person, but it should be, what have we done to undo the impact of history, the impact of the history of slavery, colonization, dictatorships on our lives?
Okay, right. So what have we done? Right. Comments on that one, because it's also connected to the things that we have been talking about, right? So what have we done?
If I may jump in and
Yes.
take liberties as a scribe and as a participant in the room, I think it's an interesting question, because often we understand what people have kind of done to our continent,
Yes.
and the histories, and we're very good at telling that story. But the question that I have as a young 30-year-old is, over the past 40 years of the wave of decolonization, the wave of democracy, have those things actually changed anything? So because we achieved a level of decolonization, or because we achieved a level of industrial growth, or because we achieved a level of democracy, if that's not translating to a change on the continent, then the question is, why have we done those things? Not to say that they are bad,
Yes.
but to ask the question of what are the alternatives that we could have been pursuing? And I think that conversation becomes interesting and important, and needs us to think about whether the status quo makes sense, which I think most of us would say it doesn't. But more importantly, how do you actually then imagine what that status quo is? And I think we're not good enough at doing that, or when we do, we get completely usurped by the world order or the other bigger powers that be. And the question is, if we can't imagine that different system and if we can't create it, how do we at least stop being demoralized and continue the fight to try and imagine something else? So that would be my input.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, because you're reminding me of, those leaders who actually tried to do better, and they found themselves failing because the outside powers are also colluding with our own people to pull down our good leaders, who want to take us forward. But we still need to reflect of, what more can we do to do better? Because we have also seen recently from the case of Afghanistan that, when you have the will to rule yourself, it doesn't matter whether you're a good leader or not, the West back off, okay? Because they see that there's determination, to rule yourself. Unfortunately, that's not happening for us in Africa. We have gained, political independence, but we also see that, Europe is still controlling, or Europe, America, they're still, and even Asia, they are controlling us. So what do we need to do in order to push out all these people that want to control us and be ourselves and decide for ourselves that this is where we want to go? Okay, Dr. Gumbi, can I allow Tammy to speak first, because Tammy will be speaking for the first time. Okay, Tammy Mteteni.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and greetings to all the participants here. I think that the issues that are being raised here, are of importance, and as has already been pointed out, they have been dealt with in the discussions and the presentations that have been made just before now. However, my take here is that to a very great extent, the violence that has been meted against Black people and the colonized people, as well as their experiences of exile and prison, etc., are well documented. However, I think the psychological impact of slavery and colonization have not been sufficiently dealt with. And I think that the previous speaker who spoke of trauma is for me very spot on. I don't think we have dealt with the trauma that as Black people we have experienced insofar as our lived experience under slavery and under apartheid colonialism and all other forms of oppression we have seen. If you take, for example, Naim Agba, who is an eminent Afro-American psychologist who has written a book called Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. He speaks of what he calls the ghost of the plantation. And he says that to all intents and purposes, research amongst African Americans in the United States demonstrates that the issues that they are confronting today are directly traceable, and the roots are to be found in their psychological trauma of slavery. And he then says he has written the book to try and exorcise from the collective minds of African Americans the ghost of the plantation and not give refuge to it. Here in Africa, coming closer home, you have Ngugi, the Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who writes almost along the same lines, and he says that one of the weapons that have been unleashed by colonialism, I may not be quoting him verbatim, but I will paraphrase him. He says that the biggest weapon that has been unleashed is what he calls the cultural bomb. And the implications or the impact of the cultural bomb, according to him, is to annihilate people's beliefs in themselves and to see the past as a wasteland of non-achievement. And all what we are involved in is an attempt to try and distance ourselves from that wasteland of achievement, of non-achievement. We do not know our history. We do not know who we are. We do not know where we come from. And as a result, we are involved in what other people have called extreme self-hate. If you look at here, South Africa, in fact, I think you have manifestations of this, and I'm not speaking as a professional psychologist here, but I'm speaking from a point of view of observation. And I say to myself, what accounts for such tremendous levels of anger and violence amongst the people? We are a violent nation, we are a violent people. And it is because we come from a violent past and a violent cultural experience, where anything to be solved, any resolution of a problem cannot be solved through discussion or anything, because apartheid has taught us that to resolve a problem, you have to be violent. There's no other way of resolving a problem. Why do we have so much violence against members of the opposite sex? I mean, amongst women? Why do we have this femicide? Why do we have men killing children and their women and all of these things? And in my mind, I am convinced that before we exorcise ourselves from the ghost of the plantation or the ghost of apartheid, I think we will not move an inch, because there is so much that is wrong with us in the past. We have not had the time to analyze ourselves and say, where do we come from and what are the implications of that past in the present current behavior of our people. Okay. This is also inclusive of the white people. I'm concluding. Yes. This is also inclusive of the white people. They are also in their own way traumatized. The loss of power amongst them has also been traumatic in its own way, where now you find that when you were the boss yesterday, today the boss is a black woman, whom yesterday you thought that woman was inferior to you and could never be your boss. And so there is so much anger, both black and white. And you see it every day, even in the roads as you drive, there is just too much anger. That is my opinion and my view of what is happening in our country today. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very important observation you've made. And I think moving forward, this issue of trauma and the trauma healing, should be key, to help us move forward. Because it's true in terms of racial issues, as you mentioned, it's also true in terms of gender relationships. Okay, W. Nkulsu.
Yes, it's Wiseman Nkulsu.
Okay.
Yeah, I also just want to contribute to this current conversation. Linking to what Advocate Kumbi said. To me, the fact that we had strong kingdoms that were really in line with best practice, globally, especially in Sudan, right up to Ghana and so on. The fact that those kingdoms were destroyed by apartheid, and we're now possibly all the states that we have, the people that are called South Africans or Nigerians, we only came together, they've got less than 60 years, possibly being one nation. So this thing of really forming united nations out of those states, we shouldn't take it easily, lightly. The other reason why this is important is that because in Asia, the destruction of indigenous ways of government, of trade, of mining, didn't suffer the same destruction as we did. So the Asian countries have managed to reconnect with their own cultures, and their governance in the early years, whether you're in Japan or Korea, now in China, it was not the democracy or the way that is defined by the West, but they managed to come up with ways of governance that were linked to their traditional structures, but had respect and the interests of the people. And through that, they were able to go forward. So this is the dilemma, that those who lead our countries, whether they really deeply appreciate that we cannot, those kingdoms that were destroyed, and now we find we cannot reconnect with the traditions, the way that they're governing themselves, the way that because what distinguished them between us today was that deep spirit of self-reliance on their own, finding solutions, how to grow food, how to trade, how to manufacture, whatever they're manufacturing. I think this state of the new states that we find ourselves is frustrating to the majority of our people, because our traditional ways of sustaining ourselves, food production, trading, were destroyed. And now when we get independence, freedom, we have no skills, we have got no capabilities to actually achieve, have confidence that we can be self-reliant the way that our forefathers and mothers were. But our priorities, as a result, our priorities for development have to a large extent been defined or determined by the Western countries, who are telling us to do things that they never did when they were our level of development. And this thing of really, when as the new states, we have not managed to consolidate us as a new states and develop a common purpose, and also embrace a deep spirit of self-reliance. So what we should all be calling for is just skilling our people, educating our people, so that the capacity to be involved in productive activities be enhanced in African people. I doubt that our leaders really prioritize these issues. They did. We talk a lot about infrastructure. Infrastructure is important, but your main infrastructure, if you want to develop a country, is your people. Yes. We have never, even now, including us in South Africa, this thing of the low productivity of the majority of our people, we are just scratching the surface. We should be dedicating, rather than deal with the symptoms, which are poverty, which are inequality, and so on. The deep-rooted thing is that our capacity to be self-reliant has never been developed. And we lost the kind of skills that our forefathers had because of disruption of corruption. So our new agendas for development, the more we take it upon ourselves and really, hopefully, our leaders can understand that Africa is standing still. Okay. We cannot move forward unless, one, we work as bigger entities than individual countries.
Okay.
And just saying, yeah, possible, I'll stop there.
Yeah, because we only have now 2 minutes,
okay.
before
Thank you.
back to plenary, where we are going to give a report of what we have discussed, and then we make proposals. Because from the things that I'm hearing, what I'm hearing is that African people are still traumatized even in post-colonial period. Okay. And unless we heal from this trauma, the possibility of moving forward is not there. So it is very important then to come up with the programs, be it at family level or at faith level or education level, economic systems, political level, where we can now begin to focus on healing from trauma, so that we can be liberated and move forward. Okay, we've mentioned the issue of our leaders. We are worried about the kind of leadership that we have. We are worried because they are focusing on themselves, and not themselves as a unit, but themselves as individuals who are easily manipulated by the outside forces. And maybe that's where then we move to the issue of unity, that what we want to see is our leaders united, right? So that we can move beyond the barriers that are there at the moment. And then we have also said that, there's a lot that we can draw from our pre-colonial period, but at the same time, bearing in mind that we can never be static. We need to move forward. Things have changed. And then how do we draw them from the past in order to move forward in a way that we are competent, with other continents, so that they don't look down on us and keep on using our resources as if we don't have the capacity to use them ourselves. So these are the things that I have picked, from the different people who have said something, and added my own views to it as well. And so now we go back to the plenary, and there we are going to have a report, from our volunteer, Dr. Chikane, who is going to present on our behalf. I want to thank you all. I'm sorry that not everyone had an opportunity to say something, but at least we were able to be together and reflect on this. And I thank you also for the comments that have been written in the chat. Okay, and I'm hoping that our rapporteur will also will draw from those comments that are in the chat as representing our voices. Okay, so thank you, and let's go back to the plenary.